I'm Jane Mulcahy. This is a special series on the topic of relationships matter. And today I am very, very excited to be joined by Michelle Brennan Jones. Hi, Michelle, how are you?
Hi, Jane. I am absolutely delighted to be here in what I think is such an important piece of work that you're doing. Really great. Thank you for inviting me.
Thanks, Michelle. And you're one of the few people that I've actually met. I've had the pleasure of sitting beside you at an event and talking to you and connecting with you on Twitter and the Ace Aware Nation movement, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But can you just tell the viewers and the listeners a little bit about yourself, Michelle, please?
Sure, certainly. So, Jane, I was very attracted to working in communities, and it's only been in the past 6 years that I've really been reflecting on the why of that, and what really has been driving me is to give support and understanding to people, reflecting the experiences that I had growing up in the community that I had. So I feel that preventative work is so powerful.
Mm.
For many, many years now, I've worked with families with babies and children under 4, and it's all about attachment-led,
Okay.
relationship-based, building up those beautiful bonds with families and their babies. So that's what I do at the moment.
Super. Thanks, Michelle. So what I was going to ask you, because I hadn't known actually that you have worked in the early years field for quite a while. So my question had been, as a person in recovery, what is your understanding of attachment and a felt sense of safety? But maybe also from your practical and work, experience all these years, why does it matter? Why does it matter that we feel safe with our caregivers? Why does it matter that we feel secure in the attachment?
Um, I think I reflect back to when I felt that you needed those safe bases, but I didn't know attachment theory then. I
Mm.
just knew that without having someone that you could go back to, it was really difficult to explore the world from a position of feeling confident and feeling as though you could take risks.
Hmm.
So I think when I look back on the risks that I took growing up, they were very much couched in risk taking from a perspective that I didn't care about the
Okay.
outcomes. And those reasons were because I didn't have a secure attachment. I didn't have an adult that I could go back to growing up.
Hmm.
So you end up realizing as an adult, if you reflect on how you navigated your childhood, and that's what I have done, is I've realized that actually I used an awful lot of tools to get me through an unhealthy situation, but actually they were unhealthy tools. So they could have been like drinking and smoking and taking drugs, and really those risk taking, I find it fascinating because we talk in attachment world of you want to be able to take risks, but it's not about those kind of risks. And it's so interesting to me because sometimes you can see this duality of language. You can have this one word, but it can have such different ramifications depending on the circumstances. So for me, taking risks growing up were because I didn't really care about the outcomes, whereas now I feel with my children, I want them to feel safe with me so they can then take risks to find out who they are and they can be vulnerable. And that, I think, has been something that I have learned over the years in the healthy relationships that I've now developed. And I've never actually thought about that until I've said that there just now about the whole duality of risk taking. So I find that quite interesting.
Yeah, no, that is a fascinating reflection because, of course, for people and many teenagers, experiment and do kind of foolish things. And, some of that is the brain restructuring and moving on. But certainly if people, I suppose, become too dependent on drugs or alcohol to navigate their world, then those are unhealthy risks, as opposed to figuring out, I'm Michelle, what do I stand for? Who do I want to be? What am I interested in? So powerful reflections there. And we met at the Ace Aware Nation events in Glasgow a good while ago now, pre-COVID, at least 2018, I think, was when we met first. For you, Michelle, what is the value of the ACEs framework?
Well, I was trying to remember to speak to you today, Jane, when it was I first came across it, the whole idea of your childhood biologically affecting your adulthood. And there was a radio show on Radio 4, which I'm sure you're familiar with, called Unhappy Child, Unhealthy Adult.
Mm-hmm.
And I listened to that and it kind of blew my mind, because there was a doctor explaining to a journalist that actually the anxiety that you feel as a child when you're in an unhealthy and terrifying environment will have ramifications on your biology.
Mm-hmm.
So then, I don't know, it just kind of, it was like a stack of dominoes falling. Then I discovered all the work of the ACEs report and the questionnaire, the ACEs questionnaire, and all the survey that came out. I've known Dr. Suzanne Zedek for a very long time, but when she started doing workshops on adverse childhood experiences, and the connection that I saw between that and attachment theory was so obvious to me. I felt, because for me personally, my attachment figures were not the people that I could go to feel safe, but the people who made me most afraid. So when I realized actually the fear would have a biological implication with increased cortisol levels and what I know we understand now to be toxic stress, which really, really has helped me understand why I try to manage my anxiety and my very, very stressful body and mind with all the different things that I use, like alcohol, particularly, and when I was younger, it would be smoking and drugs. And it actually made sense to me, because I hadn't developed an internal working model that made me feel safe and secure. I had developed an internal working model that made me feel unsafe and insecure. And the world's a big place with lots of scary things, and if you don't have that internal, it's like it's something that you
A
need to be able
compass.
to draw on.
Yeah.
Yeah, compass. Yeah, and to be able to draw on, and then you top it up again, and then you draw on it and you top it up again, and so that you aren't able to top those things up, and then you fill them up with other things. But now I've been able to recognize why I made the choices I did, and it's allowed me to be able to make healthier choices. And I think that has been what the whole the knowledge of adverse childhood experiences has given me so much power over my own decisions, whereas before I felt I couldn't make any decisions because I didn't know how to. Whereas now I feel more informed, and also, you know what, Jane, I feel I can be a lot kinder to myself.
I think that is, for me, that's one of the huge things that leaps out at me anytime I talk to someone for whom this was a revelation for themselves, for their own lives and their own coping strategies and ill health or poor relationships or whatever it was, that it's like, oh my God, this is why, or this is a huge contributing factor, along maybe with poverty or racism or other things too in the background. Was it freeing for you a little bit, Michelle, to kind of go, it wasn't a brokenness, an inherent intrinsic brokenness in me, it was I wasn't supported and safe and loved and nurtured in the way that I needed?
Yeah, it actually, I felt that that having that knowledge really helped me to piece things together and to become whole. So really, they were like bits of a jigsaw that I was able to put together and see a picture and be able to think, okay, now I know why I feel so anxious all the time and why I'm a people pleaser and why I scan the room in a hypervigilant way. You know what it's given me, Jane? It's given me the language. And as we know, when you can put language onto emotions and onto situations, then it's half the battle to understanding them and being and not being overwhelmed by them. So I think language as well is really, I've got the language now to
Mm,
explain my dysregulated
yeah.
stress response, cortisol level, my
Yeah.
frontal cortex goes offline. You know, it's like, but I actually understand that. I'm not
Yeah.
saying it because I feel it. And it's like I've been given this wonderful opportunity, even though I'm a layperson. You know, I'm not a scientist, but you know, I've studied English literature, and if
Yeah.
that isn't the human condition in a nutshell, I don't know what is. I've always been interested in why people do what they do, but I guess the kernel of that was why do I do what I do, you know?
Sure. And did the ACEs science help at all maybe understand intergenerational trauma and how, you know, maybe your caregivers who weren't as safe and loving and supportive as they might have been also probably had certain things modeled to them before?
Yeah.
Did it help with that?
Well, yes and no, I guess, you know, in that I always knew that, you know, that particularly on my mum's side, she had really traumatic childhood, and she really was not able to manage that at all. And of course, she could not communicate in a way that took any responsibility. I've always taken responsibility, and I think that's where now I've got the language for relate, rupture, repair. When I was a teenage mum, I made that decision to become a teenage mum because I thought I wanted to feel needed, and I wanted to be able to show that I could take care of someone, if not myself. And you know, my relationship with my son is a beautiful thing, and you know, and we are still very close. Um, and I feel so lucky. But I know, looking back 3 decades ago when I had him, that whenever I behaved in a way that was dysregulated, I would always up, and I never hit him. Whereas I got hit, but you know, I kind of want. Basically, I was like a stubborn teenager. You know, as you're saying with the brain, I'm like, I'm going to be the absolute opposite of everything that I've ever known parenting wise. So that wasn't too hard to kind of flip it like that. But I know that what I did do, and I look back and think I'm so grateful to myself, and I don't know how that happened. That is that I always said sorry when I
Okay.
fainted, when I lost the head. You know what I mean? It's like, you know, the whole kind of thing when you just kind of well, we know that when our prefrontal cortex goes offline, and it's our emotional, just like limbic system going into overdrive. When I did that a lot when I was young, I would always apologize, and I would always say that it was on me, and I would always take responsibility for that,
Mm.
to the point that my son will go, please mum, I know it's like it's fine. I try and manage now. I'm learning about boundaries. That's my next kind of learning about myself and how to, because I literally wanted everyone to never feel it was their fault, because growing up I always felt that I was to blame for everything. Does that make sense?
Yeah, wow. Yeah, and for me now, the word people pleaser, when people describe themselves as that, like it's a nice, it sounds like it's a nice thing, but it's really not, in the sense that for the person, it's quite harmful and means they are always putting everyone else ahead of their own needs, which is not sustainable. It's not a healthy practice. So the ongoing work and boundaries, you know, fair dues, because it's not easy at times when people are pushing back and saying, Mom, get me this, or, you know,
Really hard,
yeah.
really hard. And when I feel it in my body before I feel it in my brain, you know, and I feel it and I feel really uncomfortable and really quite distressed sometimes. And it takes practice, and it takes, again, the repairing, the forgiving myself, just being good enough and just doing all I can. And when I can, I look to the healthy relationships I have around me to help. And that, I think, is really an amazing development for me, because it's about making yourself vulnerable and saying you can't do it all on your own. And that, you know, that's been a real challenge for me as well.
Yeah, I love that point too, because you know, we all need to ask for help. And it can be uncomfortable to say, I'm out of my depth here. I'm overwhelmed. I actually don't know what to do next. Um, but it's something I've noticed, all right, with people who need help. You know, everyone else can see they need help, but they can't accept it. They can't trust, or they're afraid of being vulnerable and who might let them down next, you know. So it's an interesting journey to be on in relation to criticisms of the ACE study, of which there have been quite a lot, and in Scotland as well, where, you know, I've followed the ACE Aware Nation movement and I've been envious of it. You know, I've enjoyed it, but as someone in Ireland, I only wish we had the same kind of momentum across sectors. Do you think any of the criticisms are valid, Michelle?
I think it's interesting, because I know that you know, sometimes I feel that I am in like a kind of a confirmation bias bubble, you know. So when I kind of go out of that, and I look from the other side, and I feel, well, I can. Of course, if it was about scoring people, that would be crazy, because you know, that doesn't make any sense. And it has to be about the relationships first, front and center. But as part of an approach, what you know, I mean, because, like, for example, trauma informed approach, this is a very popular, you know, saying. But is it, what does it actually mean? And again, it goes back to, it's about relationships. And it's like, being trauma informed just means not making an assumption about someone and judging them and treating them like you would treat someone that you cherished, love them, but just by being kind to them. And that sounds so, I think it's because it kind of sounds a bit twee, but if you've ever been a GP or gone into a system of like social work or whatever, you'll find that there's not that much kindness sometimes around, you know. So actually being kind is, it's quite it's quite a revolutionary thing. So
Yeah.
for me, the criticism is totally fair enough if it was just about a score. But of course, that was a that was a whole population study. You can't just take that and
Mm,
go like, this will suit for me, for example. You know.
mm,
However, when I watched the resilience film, The Biology of Stress and the Science of Hope, what stood out at me was I could be that day 20 years younger. So obviously that freaked me out. But then you kind of realize that actually what that's giving you is information that is not saying it's going to happen. It's saying the correlation of it, isn't it? It's not saying the causation. And so it's about those, I guess, those subtleties as well. So it's like, is it a blunt instrument in the wrong person's hands? Is
yeah. And I think, again, your emphasis, given the topic of this podcast on relationships being kind of everything. And when I spoke to Dr. Bruce Perry for the last series, How to Talk Policy and Influence People, that was one of his major beefs with the ACE study, was that it didn't take into account either the nature, timing, and intensity of the adversity. So again, when we're tiny babies, we're most vulnerable, but also then the positive experiences. So who do we have in our lives? When did we have enough people when we clocked up an ACE score of 4? Were there loving people around us? And who do we have now if things happen? Because you mentioned several times the healthy people in your life, the healthy relationships. We all need them across the life course. So that is so important indeed. Another thing that I really like about Bruce Perry in terms of how do we best engage with people, whether they have trauma in their histories or not. You know, they might just be stressed out on a given day. Certainly, I'm often stressed. But his optimal sequence for engagement, the regulate, relate, reason one, I think is a lovely phrase because it's easy to remember. In your own experience of accessing services over the years, maybe when you were going through tough times or just in general, were you met by workers and received by workers in that kind of way, a regulate, relate, reason type of approach? And if not, would it have made a difference?
I'm quite unique, I think, in the way that I have had the same GP for over 23 years, very same one, and yet the you know, the relationship is really one-sided. You know what I mean? It's like, it's so, and she's really nice and I really like her, and for example, when I had my third baby, I was at real risk for various reasons of having postnatal depression, and I tried to say to her on the phone, look, she phoned me up to say congratulations and having a new baby. What GP would do that? So that in itself is a magical thing. However, she wouldn't let me tell. It could have been that, might have just been a conversation. It would have stopped a year of agony for me in postnatal depression. I will never know, but sometimes it can just be that little, like, connection with someone saying that they're there for you, that interestingly, counterintuitively, means you don't need them because you know they're there. And I think that with systems, what I found, maybe with social work, it depends on the individual person. With psychiatric services, terrible experiences. I've had terrible experiences with psychiatric services. I've never had a good experience with a psychiatric
I'm
service.
sorry to hear that, but not too
So
surprised.
it's like, I look back and I didn't any of this language now. I was terrified, and I look back and think it was just constant pharmacological aspect, no psychological or relationship based at all. So I really hope that changes. Who knows? But anyway, that was my experience. It was really awful. People don't actually have to have lots of kind of academic background. Of course, you know, sometimes it's an excellent thing, but other times it can really be someone has a real feel in a human to human touch or contact. And you know, when I read Bruce Perry's the boy who was
The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog, that one. Yeah, it's a great book.
and you know, and I thought that when he described it, Rosa, was it, or she just hugged the children, and it's like, but of course, touch. We know touch helps babies' brains grow.
Yeah.
I know if I'm feeling dysregulated and then I hold my husband, like, I've got an oxytocin necklace on because I value it so much.
Yeah.
No, because I feel it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I actually feel it. So I know this isn't just like words that people say, I feel it at a physical level, and I just think that with touch and with connection in like with human connection, it's a dangerous world out there. So I think that that's kind of been lost within that, because
Mm.
you know you couldn't, what, your doctor going to hug you?
Yeah. Well,
Why not? Why
it's a great point. Yeah. But
it's like,
again, it comes down to boundaries and I suppose power, because people with power can foist their unwanted attentions onto other people, and it's been abusive. But I do think where the craving for touch, where a person is vulnerable in the moment, as we all can be, then a gentle touch on the hand or on the shoulder, or indeed a hug, it's a medicine in and of itself for me as well.
yeah, because I find it really fascinating because it makes people really uncomfortable. It's like the very thought of it. It's like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? You're just like, there's no way. But it's so, I mean, that shouldn't be controversial, and yet it is totally controversial.
Yeah.
You know, I know in the early years, but we all know that that it, if you weren't touched as a baby, you weren't hugged, it's going to affect you. It's going to really, these are serious things, and I think because they're all so, like, you know, kind of soft and all that kind of thing, we're not taking it seriously, when actually we're talking about serious things here. We're talking about things that actually allow people to fulfill their potential as a human being in this world of ours.
Yeah, it's so true. And I know for myself as well, I even had the skin hunger a bit during COVID for other people who weren't my family members, and we'd be quite a tactile family with loads of hugs, but still there's a thing. And I remember being in the swimming pool the first time someone's toe touched me after COVID, and I was freaking out. It was like, what is that alien object, because it was so strange. So our nervous systems have been recalibrated as well. That's the other thing. So even though we might like people and technically quite enjoy physical contact, it's not as though we are where we were before. Some people might be better off, but I think, we've all been.
Very interesting, because of course COVID is a game changer for that, and yet I deliver groups in my work with families with new babies and very young children, and at first it just felt, oh, okay, chairs are a bit far apart and nobody's touching and everyone's wearing masks, but gradually, and now everybody's back to how they were before, and it's like our brains have, because it was, you felt it in your body, it was uncomfortable when there were a few people in a space, because as you say, we hadn't been used to it. And but I feel that for in our groups, everybody's together again. Babies are so happy at seeing other babies, and parents are so happy at seeing other parents. And I think that when we talk about like trauma, and we talk about uh, our nervous system, I think isolation can be such a terrible, it can be so, that can be really, really debilitating as well. So again, about relationships,
Mm. And
it's
would you, in the work that you're doing, would you have any concern for the moms who had babies during COVID and were kind of isolated from their parents or other support networks? I would have hated that, not being able to go out, being afraid of other people holding my baby. I mean, that's not natural.
no, no, and everyone had to, abide by the whatever the regulations were and the restrictions, and it was really difficult. And I was like, I don't know who I feel most sorry for: the new mum who doesn't
Mm.
know what she's missing, or the
Yeah.
mum with a second child who knows what she's missing because she had so many things with her first child that she's not having with her second one.
Oh,
Do you know what
yeah,
I mean? It's like sometimes ignorance is bliss, because parents, lots of parents had their first baby in lockdown, and they had
sure.
no idea what different groups used to
Mm.
be on. But the good thing is they're all back again, but we still have to, I think, recognise that we're only at the beginning of kind of processing all of this. It's
Yeah.
like we can't possibly just go, okay, that's that. We've had a
Over.
pandemic, and it's like, and now we'll move on to whatever else we've got. I think the we have to recognise that, and it's a worry for me. I feel that maybe the stuff are so keen to get back to normal that um they're not recognizing the issues that were brought up with children having to be isolated for such a long period of time, and adults, of course, and teachers.
My children are 10 and 9, and certainly one of them has struggled with the return to normality more in a way that I didn't anticipate. I thought he'd be bursting to be back in the world, but you can get used to the little bubble of home as well, and then it's hard. You know, it feels also when you give messages of the world outside is dangerous, this is the only safe place, you know, we can't go anywhere. That's hard then to reset and go, actually, no, it's safe again, and other people are fine again, and school is safe. It's just tough
And
to
again,
process.
just like me talking about how, trauma-informed care or attachment-led services all about just saying that you're here for someone. I think with children in COVID, it's just saying these feelings will be normal, and we're all figuring it out together because we've never had to deal with this before. So let's go slowly, and don't feel that, that we're all like in a race to get
Mm.
back to wherever we were, because we're never going to get back to that, because we don't know what that is, because
Yeah.
years of like
Yeah, and some of it wasn't that great either. You know, some of the pre-COVID wasn't that great. One thing for the new moms that I did envy was just the slower pace, the less expectations on them, not the social isolation or the physical distancing, but the fact that they if they were working, they could work from home right up until the baby. And so stress levels in one way went down, I think, and there was in the first lockdown less premature babies, which
for
in and
me
of itself
personally.
is quite interesting. You know, it tells us something about the hectic pace of the modern world as well. Um,
I
but
know. For me personally, I had actually a really good lockdown, because my youngest son was 13, 14, and we really did lovely things together. We would spend the morning making a list, and we do mindfulness, and we bake cakes, and I'd do work and he'd do work, and then we'd go out running and cycling, and it was actually a really special time for me, and I know how lucky I am to have that. Really lucky to have that.
And it sounds lovely actually for him too at a time that can be tricky, and again, kids can be pulled into situations that they may not even want just because that's there. So to have again the safety and the bonding time, it sounds lovely.
Yeah,
It's
I
it's
know,
it's,
I
it's
know.
great to have had. And Michelle, just to return to the kind of the issue of knowledge and information, do you think that all frontline services would benefit from information on attachment and safety and interpersonal neurobiology, ACEs, trauma, survival mechanisms, and the like, and how we all have a role in healing, regardless of our precise job description?
Definitely, because it is all about human people engaging with each other, and that crosses all, like I find we in I don't know if you're familiar with the film that the NHS in Scotland made, called Sliding Doors. It's a really lovely video, but it really helped me because I identified one of the people in it, and it was about doctors or dentists or any service really being aware that there could be issues with individuals, clients, for want of a better word, and to be able to treat them in a way that made them feel safe. And that could just be by saying that they had choice. collaborating with them so they aren't having decisions made to them, and other things like that. But you can imagine, in all life we want to be able to be players in our own life. So wherever we are, we want to be able to feel that, maybe, when I think about how I felt I didn't have a voice growing up, you feel as though your voice doesn't matter. And so to feel valued, I think all those areas that you're talking about are essentially about valuing individuals, and making them feel that they matter and that their voice matters. And that, I think, crosses all sectors. Really, it really does. Anyone that's working with people should know about relational, and adversity, and also about ACEs, because no one is going to uh, have a label that says all these things about them. You've just got to treat someone in a way that is respectful. And I think that when you have the knowledge, the information, then you're making those informed decisions, and maybe it gives you a bit more confidence, because sometimes I think it's a lack of confidence that people then hide behind their name and their title, and they don't. The people I've met who are in the most powerful positions, uh, but are the most generous with their time, are the ones that will be curious and ask and admit when they don't know something. And it feels to me that is, you said earlier about power, and it is about power dynamics, and about feeling as though you don't want to give away that power. Whereas I feel like I've now got that power. So when I go into my doctor and say, I've got a dysregulated stress response, and I now know all about, serotonin reuptake inhibitors and how they don't, serotonin isn't this and that, and they kind of look at you like you're mad, because it challenges them. And it's unfortunate, because then you become to, well, you close down again, rather than,
Yeah.
yeah, you could have a conversation that's a more of a, who knows themselves better than you, do you know what I mean? And yet
Yeah.
we're not really given those tools by the people who actually it would be helping them with their jobs.
Mm. And I, I don't know if you can help me with this question, but it came up in relation to my own work. I was supervising an MA student recently, and some of the respondents to her work kept using the phrase "a safe space," that they were creating a safe space for the young people. Um, do you think our frontline service providers really know what that means? Like, to you, as someone who grew up with what you grew up with this dysregulated stress response system, a body that was tense in fight and flight a lot of the time, how does one create a safe space for you?
It begins with the relationships with the young people. So you collaborate with them, and together you find a safe space. So it could be anything. You'll never know until you give the space to create the safe space. So you've got to take one step back and create that space for having those conversations and listening. Listening is something that people don't generally do to young people. They might say
Mm,
they do, but do
mm.
they really? And I learned so, my sons, I've learned so much from them, and I've learned so much. Young people are amazing.
Yeah, they are.
So I would say collaborate, discuss, create what they feel would be safe for them, not what you think is safe for them.
Yeah, I love that bit. So kind of even ask, and I wonder as well, for say young people of different ethnic backgrounds, there's going to be again a different power dynamic, a different maybe elephant in the room in relation to white supremacy, or expectations of how they might be treated. So again, maybe asking, how can I help you feel safe, you know?
Absolutely, because if you think, in Edinburgh, we've got a lot of families of refugees from Ukraine, and they've all there's young children in a primary school near where I work, and there's older children in the secondary school, and I don't know what kind of conversations have been had with these young people, but you can imagine that it will be you'll have to have a really gentle approach, because if you're coming from a war-torn country, then where do you even begin to understand that? And just be guided by giving space to young people who um, will, if you give enough room, find their own way and find their voice. But you have to be able to create the environment, don't you? It's like the whole thing about the analogy of the flower. You get the earth and you get the water and you get the sun, and then the flower grows. So you have to just create the environment for people, particularly if they have experienced racism. And I think it's so important to be led by what they're saying.
Do you think as well, Michelle, that frontline workers kind of need to tune into their own bodies and energy? Because like as a parent, if I'm having a stressful day or stressful morning, it can have a contagious effect for the kids, and I'm sure you've experienced this or been on the receiving end of someone else's emotions that were dysregulated. Do you think workers know that they're bringing in their energy and their bodies into the room, that then a young person can pick up on? And you were describing yourself as scanning and hypervigilant. Like, is that part of the awareness as well, the body awareness?
Yeah, definitely. I think that I mean, I think about teachers, for example, and it's such a stressful job. And I think that really the support that they could be given to then support the young people. I think you want to mirror these things, you can and model these things. I think that it would be important for frontline workers to understand that they don't have to say anything to make a negative impact on someone, never mind a positive impact. Because if you're someone like me, you pick up on a feeling from someone within a split second. You know if they actually are either listening to you, want you to be there. Honestly, it's like that hypervigilance is so finely attuned that you immediately know whether someone is valuing your worth or judging you. And I think that can be without any language at all, never mind tone of voice. When I go into schools as part of a project that I volunteer for, and teachers say, what can we do to help children? When I talk about childhood diversity, I said, well, don't shout at them. It may be all they've ever known. So you may think that is going to make a difference to them listening to you, but actually, I mean, it's like I was shouted at my whole childhood, and you either become so immune to it that you don't hear anything because you dissociate from it, or it triggers such a horrible dysregulated stress response that you have to get out, and that's when your fight, flight, or freeze kicks in. So it's just even things that, see, when you've probably never experienced something in the way of like that kind of relentless domestic violence and abuse, and those the atmosphere of when's it all going to kick off. I mean, I know I can only speak for myself, but I'm sure other people that have been brought up in those environments say it's not even the actions, the fighting, the waiting that's the worst, because you can feel the atmosphere and you're just dreading what's going to happen. And I think that's when you end up behaving in a way that is not socially acceptable, because you know that what is about, even if nothing is going to happen, because your brain's so trained to things happening, you look around and think everything's like a war zone just about to happen. I mean, literally, everything. So I would say that if frontline workers understood their own body, they would understand how they were presenting themselves
Mm,
and how attuned children are, because children are very, very, very smart.
mm. Yes, and you mentioned as well the rupture repair kind of cycle and the importance of saying sorry. I firmly believe we all make mistakes. We all get it wrong. We could be a busy teacher who just loses the temper, or I don't know, just a psychologist who looks distracted because something's going on in their own life. Do you think that as well is something that they need to know, the importance of owning their own mistakes and saying sorry in order to model that
Yeah,
repair?
totally. Yeah, honestly, I feel like when I learned about rupture repair, it was so transformational for me, because there is this really simple model that instinctively feels right to me, because you are one saying, I can't get everything right all the time, so well, who can? So that in itself is amazing. And two, you're being responsible for your own actions. And then the idea that you're modeling that children will be able to manage, instead of be overwhelmed when things go wrong, because they have had that happen to them, where they know that it's okay. Because really, you know, it we all need to be forgiven for things, and we all need to take responsibility for things. And it's when relationships will never develop when you don't have that in it with two when someone will not take responsibility. It becomes it's too difficult to um there's no way in, really, because it's a barrier. And I know that it's a barrier, and I accept that. But if you're a child and an adult's not taking responsibility, when you know, and you know what fairness is, then trust becomes, it's because it's that important. Rupture repair is all about trust, all about resilience, all about the good stuff that we all want for our children. We want our children to be resilient, but in that we need to be able to balance rupture and repair all the time, every day. That's the thing, isn't it? It's like,
Every time we make an error, I agree. I think, and it's something that I find marvelous in a bad way when you see an adult who just can't say sorry. They probably are, but they can't say the words, so they pretend it never happened. Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
But it's not a good way to go through your life, and it can be extremely harmful. But I think as well, with kids or adults who've not grown up with that behavior modeled, the making repair after the relational rupture, it's part of the resetting, it's part of the healing, to realize we might have had a big Barney and we said mean things to each other, or we said we'd never talk again, but actually we can come together and say sorry, maybe hug, and grow beyond it. And that's a little new neuron being fired, or a few of them even.
Yeah,
um
yeah. I'm a big fan of neuroplasticity.
yeah.
In another life, I'd love to have been a neuroscientist, because the idea that you can reshape your brain by experience, to me, actually, I believe that, because I think back 10, 20, I've been married and in a really beautiful relationship now for 20 years, but I think back to prior to then, and when I was a child, I would not be able to. I felt overwhelmed all the time. Do you know what I mean? And my prefrontal cortex went offline all the time, and it was just like, one thing to another. And I really, really rarely get that now, honestly, Jane. And it's like I've found, and that was what when we met at the deepest well at Nadine
Yeah.
Burkhan. her book and her, you know, the way she explains those supports that you need to manage to like get that safe feeling. I'm like a big fan of that, you know, the mindfulness. I run every day. Now I
Super.
understand that I have to complete my stress cycle, you know, like animals do.
Yeah, yeah,
When you have to shake it all out. And it
yeah.
all makes sense to me now. The whole idea that my body and my brain are all connected like that.
Mm,
And it's all the learning and information
yeah.
that actually is having real time effect on my life and the people around me.
So beautiful to hear. And I mean, obviously, I'm sure you might have preferred not to live through some of
Yeah,
what you lived through,
definitely.
as most people would, but you're lucky to have found the
Um,
information and the people all the same, you know, and to feel your brain changing and to feel the growing control and then noticing I can notice I'm overwhelmed and I can do these things that will help me. That's
How
amazing.
amazing is that? It is
Yeah.
amazing. And when I was younger and I would like I didn't have any obviously any healthy role models, but when I was with a friend and she was saying goodbye to her mum and they hugged each other goodbye and it would freak me out and I'd be like, that's I actually felt disgust at such a strong emotion. And I think, oh my and I was like, oh how what the and now I know it's because I just could not my brain would not be able to understand it. I could not understand it and whenever I saw parents being nice to their children I was like basically you would be like, well they're what kind of what do they need that for, and they're wimps and they're this and they're that, and it'd be really derogatory, and obviously that was my defense mechanism, and I find that really sad, but that was how I navigated
It's what you needed
not
to
having
survive.
loving family growing up. Was I thought you don't need that. That's
Mm.
weird. It's
Yeah.
so interesting now. I look back and think I remember, you know, a particular moment when I just felt so disgust over it. It was so
Yeah.
strong.
But I mean, in a way, the brain and body is very smart, you know, in that was alien to you. So it was like, get out of my orbit, make fun of it, push it away, because you probably felt unsafe just seeing
Yeah,
it. It was so,
yeah.
so strange.
I felt disorientated maybe. I
Right.
don't know an overreaction, but it kind of it just shows you doesn't how important those things are.
Yeah.
That I would have that reaction and not just ignore it. I remember it now, and I was only about 10 or something. It's like
Yeah.
I can't believe I don't remember much, so I'm amazed I remember that. So it must have really imprinted my brain at a certain point when I was like, you know, really needing that probably.
Yeah. And thank you for sharing it, because it bring, you know, you earlier spoke about touch and the importance and loving hugs and the serotonin and effect. So again, it shows we can grow, you know, we can grow and reshape ourselves in the context of healthy relationships. We can go from being tactile defensive to, maybe some of us, at least, maybe not everyone, you know.
No, of
um,
course. No, I know. And I know some people that don't hug, and that's fine. But when I used to relate hugging to basically, it was when my parent would be really drunk and feel bad about having basically that was their repair, but it wasn't a nice repair. It was a horrible. And so I really did not like that at all. So there was a lot, maybe that was where my disgust comes from, if you want to really analyze it. Um,
yeah.
but now I have, as I say, I think my having my baby when I was still, you know, my brain was still growing then because
Mm,
I was only a teenager. So having my baby while my brain was still growing, and then going to university as a mature student, my brain was still growing then. So I think that maybe I was just really lucky with the
mm.
people around me, and also the choices that I made and the slow progress to kind of getting to where I am today. I
Well,
could never have
you're,
done all this, like, do you know what I mean? It's like you are where you're meant to be or something. I don't know.
yeah, I think that's a nice way to look at it. And you know, definitely Bruce Perry and other people have spoken about post-traumatic growth and wisdom, and you have it in abundance, you know, even if there's still lingering pain and woundedness at times. You know, you're using your lived experiences for tremendous good in the world, and thank you for that, Michelle.
That's what that's kind of it, really, Jane. I do want to, if if someone hears me and thinks, oh, I can relate to that, then you do always want to make a difference, don't you? That's I've always wanted to make a difference.
Final question, Michelle, is just about policy. What do you think policymakers and politicians can do to support safe, secure, healthy childhoods and indeed safe, loving relationships across the life course?
Well, I think that, well, for me, because I didn't have a family to support me, when I had my son, there was a really good welfare system. So for me, financially, because I had no money at all, and I was in a really horrible bed sit. And so I think it's really important policymakers understand the needs of families and children, and particularly I can speak for myself when I was a single parent, because not only are you doing the job of two people, but you're bringing up a baby, and instead of being treated as though you're doing something really awful, I don't feel single parents get very good rap at the moment, but I think that financially it's an investment. So it's about investing in families and children, and allowing parents to bring up their children until because at the moment, when I was bringing up my son, I didn't have to find a job until he was 16. Now you have to go to the job centre when they're two, and it's about childcare, and it's about the stress, and it's about having sanctions, and it's about being treated as less than. So I think it's about respecting respecting babies, and I don't know if you know, but in Scotland, we're going, the Rights Act is going to be very much putting the babies and children front and centre, and having the Human Rights Act like put into the statute books. And I think for that, we have to remember that babies have a voice, and it should be around the baby as well. And so that means that the parent is treated with respect. And it's like in my work, it's always an assets-based approach. It's about what people can do, not what they can't do. So, and if you get to support families like that, you will get everything back in dividends. It's like it is totally worth investing in families. So that's what I would certainly say to policymakers, and that's what I will be saying when I'm doing the Scottish Government thing as well. Because if I look at me, if it wasn't for the support the welfare system gave me, I wouldn't have gone on to do a degree, modelled university first. Obviously my parents like left school like when they were 13, 14. Those opportunities that were there for me, that I don't know if they're there anymore, and that is a criminal thing. So I think that to consider the pressure you put parents under for their children will not be a supportive environment, because for children. So it's about addressing poverty, and addressing equality, and addressing access to education. I'm very big on education. Education saved me.
Yeah. And of course, though, if a poor single mom or a single dad, for that matter, is up against it with just survival, trying to make ends meet, trying to feed themselves and any children they're responsible for, it's very hard to be in the cortex, to be open to learning, to be open to persuasion about maybe drinking less, or making good choices. So we're not setting parents up to succeed as best they can if we put them under relentless pressure and demean them at every turn. So
Exactly. I totally agree. Yeah, absolutely. So it's about supporting people when they need support, but if people don't get up in the morning and think, I want to drink too much, and everyone wants the best for their children, everyone wants themselves to succeed, everybody wants it, and sometimes what society has to do is to help the people who need it, and they then will help the people who need it, and it'll have a knock-on effect.
Thank you so much, Michelle. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today. This has been Relationships Matter with me, Jane Mulcahy, and my wonderful, lovely, amazingly insightful, energetic, policy driving guest has been Michelle Brennan Jones from Scotland. So thank you for taking the time, Michelle.
My pleasure, Jane. It's been lovely. Thanks so much.